Good evening.
Welcome to the Joel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art at Auburn University.
I'm Imani, a second year majoring in mathematics.
And I'm Ashlyn Adair, a senior in industrial design.
Tonight it is our distinct pleasure to welcome you to a conversation with Kevin Brisco.
Our event tonight is being live streamed on Facebook and YouTube, and we want to thank you so much for joining us, whether from the comforts of home or in person.
If you are here in person, please remember to silence your cell phones.
And now to introduce this evening's program. Please join me in welcoming Chris Malinsky, Director of Education, Engagement, and Learning at the Jewel.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the museum. As my amazing students who work with me in education said, my name is Chris Malinsky. I'm the Director of Education here. And we are so excited to have you all for this event to really celebrate the artist, Kevin Brisco, whose amazing exhibition, Migratory Roots, is on view in the gallery.
Yeah.
I recognize some faces in the crowd tonight. Kevin has seen probably 200 students already over the course of the past couple of days. So he's been clocking some miles on campus, and we really appreciate his partnership, not just as an exhibiting artist, but as a teacher, working with so many amazing students on campus this week. Kevin's exhibition is part of an ongoing series at the museum called Radical Naturalism, organized by our Director of Curatorial Affairs, Erin Levi Garvey. This series is positioned to invite contemporary artists like Kevin to work and think at the museum around themes of nature and the natural world. And you'll see when you go into Kevin's exhibition how he's responding directly to work in our collection by the artist John James Audubon. Before we begin this evening, I would like to acknowledge the history and stewardship of the original homelands and territory of the Creek indigenous peoples on which Auburn University is currently sited. Descended here from the mound builders of the Mississippi River Valley, they lived here, raising families, farming, growing a variety of crops until forcibly removed during the Trail of Tears. A clan of these people, the Porch Band, remain to the south of us. No doubt their enduring relationship with this place continues. I call forth the Creek because it's important for us to always seek to understand our place in the world within this long-standing history. Now on to Kevin. Kevin Brisco is an artist who works across media, making work through painting, sculpture, installation, and performance. And I have to say it's a rare and exciting opportunity for us with the kind of amazing variety of artists we work with at the museum. We don't often have painters engage with painting students. So it was really great to see Kevin in the studio talking with students who are studying painting here at Auburn. Kevin was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, and he earned his undergraduate degree from Wesleyan University and his MFA from Yale. His work has been exhibited across the United States in Memphis, New Orleans, New York, and here at Auburn. Following his talk this evening, Kevin will be joined in conversation by Erin Levi Garvey, the Janet L. Nolan Director of Curatorial Affairs at the Jewel. I extend my deepest appreciation to the entire museum staff for their important work surrounding the program this evening. I'm also grateful to our museum donors for their investments to present these and other programs, and our unit leadership, President Christopher B. Roberts. Now, please join me in welcoming back to Auburn, Kevin Brisco.
All right. Hello, familiar faces, students, staff. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, I did see a lot of you all today, so hopefully this isn't too much of a repeat. But it's been a real joy to be here with everyone. And I'm not teaching this year, and it was really nice to interface with students. It's just, it's invigorating. You guys think differently because you're not already, programmed. I guess, yeah, we'll get into the talk. I was trying to figure out, I think there's a part of me that would like to, I do work through a lot of different mediums, and sometimes those things can be a bit disparate. But tonight, I'm mostly going to talk about painting. And I think the sort of through line and how I've like come to approach painting is, not necessarily thinking so much about the internal narrative structure of a painting, but thinking about the painting as a performance object in and of itself, like how a painting sort of exists in the waking world. What does it actually do? So speaking at college, I figured, keep it relevant to you all. This all arrived from an assignment. This sort of obsession with the painting as a performance object arrived from an assignment in my painting 2 class. I have not shown this painting in years, but here it is, live. So the assignment was to create a subjective painting. Subjective just meaning sort of influenced by your personal taste. Like, so could you find a more intense way to say do whatever you want? I enjoy painting the figure. I enjoy portraits. Since I was a kid, it is just that thing of like when you're able to capture someone's look or their countenance and really sort of nail it, so to speak. It just feels nice when you make that stroke. It's like, oh, that's it. Yes. Their look is an important distinction. So yeah, I had a friend, Jefferson Ajayi, who was D1, not D1, sorry, NESCAC #1 wrestler. And I used to always paint and draw. I started drawing with comic book characters, so it's like, felt like a nice, easy transition. So I subjective. I painted them, melted into the canvas. It's an undergraduate project. Don't judge me too harshly for my thoughts at the time. And then we were told to paint an objective painting, a painting that's not influenced by personal taste, something that just is objective, so to speak. And I think I had a sort of precipitous misread of the prompts, right? And that's instead of like trying to really think about not influencing someone with my own personal taste, I really started beginning to think about the painting as an object. What is a painting that is more of a painting than the internal narratives of it? It's just the painted object. And ironically enough, I landed on the idea of like duck paintings that you would see on like stamps and collections. That I would see, in gas stations in Tennessee and whatnot. It's like, oh yeah, that's a painting. You know what it is? It's there. Like it's that sort of object. I did not, do this with the intention that one day I would be, showing alongside with the James Audubon, the Audubon collection. But yeah. So yeah, again, this question of like, what is a painting's lived reality? How does a painting perform as an object? So my first sort of steps into like trying to, essentially get the painting as an object, like a realized object, was sort of like to address a painting that was involved in like charged material, like a material that had some sort of like a historical life to it. It's my senior thesis in college. In which I started making these paintings out of built material, or like material associated with home building. And this is primarily to do with the time when I was at Wesleyan. I was a political science major and an art major, and at a certain point, like when it came to thesis, had to make that decision of which one was I really going to dedicate myself to. My parents aren't so upset about it now, but you can imagine at the time, they would still like for me to take an LSAT, but there was a question of like, how will you support yourself? And specifically my dad was like, how are you going to take care of a family? How will you be a provider, this sort of like male provider, and put a roof over people's heads? And I think this, with, I would say less 20-year-old angst than sort of just like, hey dad, like, come on, take me seriously. I wanted to approach this thing like, oh, well, these paintings are my built surfaces. They will be these provisions or whatnot. So I started making these paintings where, these sort of hyper-masculine characters, this is, again, Jefferson, he shows up a lot, were photographed in the act of, like, building. And in the end, the things that they were building served as the surfaces that they were then painted on. And so, so on and so forth. And it was around this time, liberal arts school, like, can I be more of a liberal arts school stereotype? But it was around this time that I was introduced to the writing of Judith Butler. I don't know if you all know, but Judith Butler is like a sort of preeminent voice on gender as performance. That there isn't some sort of like essential gender. It's just reified and perpetuated every time you put on the tropes of gender. Like, you're constantly performing and reifying it. And in the same way, I was like, yeah, that is what, like, again, trying to wrap my head around what is this painting actually doing? What is it actually doing as an object? Like, what is it sort of focus instead of whatever the internal narrative of? These people are building these things, but this is not an actually functioning fence. There's not actually functioning walls. These aren't actually functioning, roofs. They're these props for gender performance, like these props for the sort of just maybe dated and outmoded gender idea of like, oh, you should be like, man should be builder. So in the cyclical nature, the object is actually just sort of performing that. So after I graduated, still like sort of thinking about this question of like, what does the painting do as an object? I think I became a bit disillusioned with painting, and like sort of like was like unsure if it sort of really served a use function outside of like internal narratives. So I began working a lot with collage and doing a lot with getting into sculpture and whatnot. I eventually moved to New Orleans. It's sort of where I'm from Memphis, but New Orleans always feels like my chosen home. I love that place. It's where I really sort of like became an adult and got on my feet as a working artist outside of like institutional. Outside of institutions. And I love New Orleans because there was this super vibrant art scene amongst for like artists who were not involved in the commercial market, but who were still making things happen in collectives, through collectives. Like, a bunch of artists get together, buy or rent out a building, and then you can put on any show that's not sort of commercially motivated. You can do whatever you want. There was so St. Claude was like the art walk there, and every second Saturday they would have all these openings, these gallery openings that occurred as simultaneously, and it was really fun. And I think that like in art, we're always like, we're always just edging closer and closer. Like, we're just trying to have a party, So I wanted to just like directly address that, and I had not actually been showing work before, but had an idea for a show and approached the gallery, and they're like, "Oh, great! Our artist just dropped out. Well, you have to put up something in 2 weeks. Put it up in 2 weeks, you do it." And I was like, "Ooh, okay." Whatever that axiom is, it's like there's you can do anything so long as you have a plan and not quite enough time. So anyway, we decided we turned the gallery into a club. We hired a bouncer, i.e., my neighbor Dave. Who he's like 6'4". I've been telling the story today. I keep saying he's like 6'7". He was like 6'3", but he was like a big presence. And if he asks you for your ID, you're gonna give it to him. So yes, and then we dance floor, hired a DJ Sissy Elliott, amazing DJ name, great DJ. And we sort of it was kind of fun to have this sort of like normal gallery walk crowd sort of rub up against the sort of like people who were just out for a party. And as the poster stated, there's it's from the same hours as the gallery, but the performance at 10 p.m. Actually, those nights did go kind of late for gallery opening. So yeah, like the people interacting with each other, it was good. It was a good party. It was a really good party. So as we edge closer to the performance time, so things would happen like sort of maybe around 9:45. The playlist starts involving sirens around 9:50 or 55. Like, the strobe lights turn from regular like flicking like white strobe lights to red and blue strobe lights. Then at 10 o'clock on the dot, the DJ plays Juvenile Back That Thing Up, which is which at the time and still today was a neutron bomb on a dance floor. Like, if they throw that down, everybody's running to it. Like, and then immediately cuts the music right in sort of the middle of the crescendo at 10 o'clock. And then 28 unnamed Black performers pull out Black umbrellas and proceed to march out of the gallery space. obviously a callback to second lines in New Orleans, the tradition of, in death, celebrating with a parade, celebrating life with a parade and marching out. Typically when the second line occurs, you see a second line, no matter what you're doing, just go follow it. Like that's kind of the modus operandi. But here the performers had instructions to completely disappear into the night. So they could not be followed. And then what we were left with was this this sort of what was once this like charged, intense like party space that was now empty, and this sort of like David Lynchian like black and white checkered floor and police strobe lights, and completely devoid, like pulled of the energy. The 28 performers represented the 28 unarmed African Americans who've been killed by police thus far in 2016. Like I said, I had 2 weeks to do the show. In the week before the police murdered Philando Castile and Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge, just an hour away from New Orleans. And I definitely went through like the things like, we can't do this show right now. And my friend was like, no, this is precisely the time we should do the show. So I've more casually been talking to students. But in the wake of the show, people came in, like in the beginning of the show, it's like you ever go to a party really early and it's just an empty room. Like people were just like really like turned off. They walk into the show and they were like, people knew that I was a painter, and I had a group of guys walk out and they were just like, ew, I was really hoping to see some paintings. I don't know what the hell that was. I don't know if they knew I was right there. I was like, in the words of Michael Jordan, I took that personally. And so for the next show, I really wanted to go like dive into my issues with painting, or my issue with like sort of wrapping my head around what is the actual use function of a painting, and what is it actually doing as an object. So I made the show for what it's worth, and just head on. So does that look really red to y'all? Oh. Anyways, so I was making these portraits of people who were very near and dear to me, who I cared about, and I valued, alongside these sort of paintings of high value objects. The Hope Diamond, it's like one of the most valuable diamonds, but one, it's not like the biggest diamond or anything, and also diamonds are not actually a rare precious stone. They're their value is completely influenced by market, market gains. The charge of the show, for what it's worth, what is worth a society that values objects over people. I think I want to say there's a lot of creative people in New Orleans, and I had a lot of really dynamic friends, but there was this, we were all so broke all the time. You all will still be in your early 20s, and maybe some of you won't experience it, and good for you. But some of you, y'all got some broke days ahead. And there was this thing that for all of like the things that we wanted to do and the sort of values and like thoughts and ideas we had, it felt like the sort of our access to value in society was to, essentially like, sell our labor for $7 an hour. What is worth in a society that values objects over people? At the same time, I knew, if I turn these people into a painting, like that's, I can sell that for the price of a used car at the time. Price is going up, but and then directly addressing the question of like, what is the worth of a portrait? Can it fully address the complexity of an individual, or is it sort of mired in issues of commodity? Like, are you necessarily commodifying someone to sort of like represent them in this way? And for what it's worth, we are more beautiful, complex, and important than high-priced objects. Was sort of the tenet of the show. Again, like with the theme, to friends near and dear, chandeliers of Versailles. Again, high-value objects. If you guys ever have the opportunity to go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the floral arrangements there are amazing. I was not into flowers until I went to the Met. I was like, this is crazy. And all of it is, it's at the, it's all funded by this heiress, Leela Akerson Wallace, who upon her death bequeathed her like fortune to make sure that the Met has flowers, which they're really good flowers, but there's part of me was like, this was your biggest priority? Like, okay. So again, thinking about this idea, aligning this idea of, beautification, charity, those things going lots of with one another. But then obviously the elephant in the room, the high value object that's sort of present is the painting. Like, these things carry a lot of value, not because of the material cost to them. Yes, oil paint is expensive, but their value derives from we would like to say meaning, sentimentality, the ideas and whatnot. But the truth is it's market forces that sort of dictate the value in art. It's an inheritance from the Catholic Church making large paintings of religious figures, and then to heiresses wanting to sort of make themselves, wealthy, like people wanting to make themselves, very important. And now we sort of live in the space of like the fetish object of the painting. So these are all still young show ideas. But for the show, like to sort of address this sort of commodity issue, I stipulated that the paintings of objects could be bought, but the paintings of people could not. In order to acquire any of the paintings of people, you had to do something to the direct benefit of the subject, preferably as an institution. Again, trying to like get into some idea, like the painting is a value object, but people have value. This didn't necessarily work. It turned out that sort of the negotiating these things was very complicated, and oftentimes the people who were depicted, can I just get the money? Like, just, and over time I realized, like, yeah, actually, I can't sort of pretend that we don't live in a sort of like a space where capital is important and always will be. So, as it stands today for that series, when they are acquired, this ended up being acquired by my hometown museum, the Brooks. Just the cost of the work, it goes straight to the subject. For a while, I stayed away from a portrait after this because of the sort of ethical issues that I found within it. And it wasn't until this year, I'll talk about another show before we get to the jewel. It wasn't until this year that I did finally really dive headlong back into making portraits for a couple of reasons. Instead of thinking of like the painting as just a valuable object, like how do we sort of retool this and use it, to our benefit, to the ways in which we would like it to operate. It is a value. It's a value object, but that's also a tool we can take and use for your own creative means. In October of 2022, I had the show in New York, Footsteps in the Dark, at Albert Spender Gallery. And so on the one hand, there was, I was struggling grad school, of course, we struggle with everything. I was struggling with the idea of, what I saw as like the impossible promise of the portrait, this idea that that in representing someone, you can like make them fully knowable. The amount of times that I would speak sometimes to collectors who were like, oh, I see this painting of them, I feel like I know them, we have them right here, and the language all felt difficult. So I wanted to figure out a way to make portraits that you can see the presence of someone, but you still know that it's an incomplete picture and that you're necessarily like completing it yourself. And I landed on this idea of sort of denied portraiture. Again, where the figure is present, but you're completing the picture in your own head. You know that it's a representation and not, them essentially. So this continued for this show, and then it was different strategies, painting in very dark tones, or where the figure is sort of turned away. You know that it's an incomplete picture and you're completing it in your head, alongside with like personal items or things that like has some sort of a value or political expediency to people, and maybe also give a sign of like the things that they care about, who they are internally. So different things. If you spend time in New York, the political, the political binary of like the e-bikes, it's like, for working class professionals, it's a lifesaver. For rich people, they hate it, and they're dangerous. So more Again, painting people, low light situations, things they're seeing, things are obscured. Gia, my former boss in New Orleans, wonderful person, Gia Hamilton. And then it came to the issue of the commodity structure of the painting, and how could I sort of find comfort or in this? How could I solve this problem of just feeling like I was necessarily putting my friends up to just be sold. And just to give some background, I imagine a lot of people here know and understand the commercial art market, but if you see some story where David Hockney sold a painting for $90 million, the David Hockney estate does not see that $90 million. Someone who collected a David Hockney from another collector and another collector sees that money. And in art, sometimes you have those who deeply care about work, and typically those are the people who first interact with artists. But then outside of that, you also have this wild secondary market where art is completely treated as commodity, except it's treated as the most efficient commodity because it's more valuable than gold or real estate because it's an unregulated market, and who knows what the prices can be. So you have a lot of speculation that happens, and this was also at a particular time where there was heavy speculation and interest on Black portraiture, and I think in one sense representation is an important thing, but then when this sort of secondary market around reselling and making a buck off of these sort of pieces arises, it becomes very difficult, and it's there's a precedent for that. So the Siegel-Brzezinski contract, it was a contract drawn up in the 1970s when this sort of issue of the secondary art market was arising by Siegel and Brzezinski, who were a lawyer and a gallerist duo, and it stipulated that artists would have 15% of the resales, would be entitled to 15% of the resales of their work. This worked for a while, for a time. Hans Hake is an artist who successfully used it for quite some time. But in the 80s, I believe the California Superior Court, it was sort of deemed unenforceable as a direct violation of copyright, or the idea of a copyright. This practice happens in Europe all the time. This is normal standard practice in Europe. It's not a crazy idea. So for this show, I ended up, taking the Siegel-Brzezinski contract and then retooling it to speak to, instead of 15% of the resale, 10% of any resale profit made on the work of a portrait would go back to not the artist, but the subject of that portrait. The idea being the painting, one, that I think everyone deserves there's a Hilton Alice quote that everyone has a copyright to their own life. And I do think that everyone should, if people are making fortunes off of the countenance or the image of someone, it's the music industry has a precedent for this, and understanding of intellectual property. Why can't art? And also the idea was that we were talking about 10% of a profit. In the future, should my paintings be worth billions of dollars? This thing can exist as a generational wealth asset in places in amongst families where that has not necessarily been the case of the history. And that this thing can be passed down from generation to generation. So, in and around, in between these shows, I was making a lot of work that my friend described my shows at the time as traps. You bring a party and then you make everyone feel bad for coming. You have a show and then no one can buy the paintings. So I wanted to investigate just the idea of happiness, which I think, but not just the sort of rote avoidant happiness, sort of like joy as a real possible deeply thought experience. And a jumping off point for this, I think David Hockney had his big retrospective in New York at the Met. And I like the idea of an artist who was just like, why are you making these paintings? Because I lived in London, now moved to LA. Like, I'm happy, and that's okay. So I was like, yeah, let's try and deal with this. Turns out, I can't really do that. So I was still like, so this piece, No Diving, it was also a time where I was like, I want to reinvest in an earnest way into the picture plane of the painting and the sort of narrative structure of the painting. So this painting is an allegory for that. But at the same time, I think, you can have, the idea, the thought of happiness, the idea and thought of joy, but that can still be troubled by things. So I will use the laser pointer. Obviously, a great scene. What the hell is happening with that hand? Somebody's drowning and no one's paying attention. But the idea of like skepticism doesn't preclude the ability to like think of or experience joy. So then, yeah, it's sort of morphed into this sort of painting as a problematized joy object, and that's where we get to the work from that's in Migratory Roots. How are we doing on time, by the way? Oh, okay, that's good. Loud, sorry. So painting as a problematized joy object. And when just like thinking and examining joy, it's like it sounds so, but like I was just like the things that just make people happy, and it's like the idea of like a clear sky, like a blue sky. I found myself profoundly, the way I think. I'm frustrated by how happy I can be on just because it's nice out. I'm just like, I'm a thinking person. I have thoughts like, why am I just acting better and happier because the sun is out? So taking that as again, a similar color palette, thinking through Hockney, but also taking that as a jumping off point of setting these scenes, but then still like troubling them. These were like these police surveillance cameras that would always show up, not in the most wealthy neighborhoods, not in the poorest neighborhoods, but in the neighborhoods where gentrification was taking place in New Orleans. So taking that as a jumping off point, but at the same time, I was also thinking about, I was working on, this was started back in New Orleans when I transitioned from working in a warehouse to working on film sets, which was great and actually did make me happy because it's like with film sets, it's like you can work for a month, make enough money to not work for 2 months, and it was perfect for painting. I was working in lighting and stuff. But a lot of those film sets, a lot of things that shoot in New Orleans are set on plantations. So I was spending a lot of time, in this job doing heavy manual labor on plantations. And in those days, I was sitting there thinking through, mulling through this sort of idea of like, oh, blue skies make you happy, but like blue skies have also seen like intense tragedy. And in those moments, I was thinking, sort of like how, it was in those spaces that history became this sort of like looking through a chain link fence, and you can't quite judge how close it is to you or isn't to you. Like I'm doing manual labor on sugarcane plantation. How how far removed are these things? It was just, and it's not like even something I can like fully moralize. It's like, oh, this is like messed up. It was just like I don't know how to feel about this. And in that, just thinking about how, and then from there arriving at the place of like, oh, like the legacy of history is writ large in the land, if you just pay attention. And also still thinking through, trying to figure out other ways to talk about African-American subjectivity without directly addressing the figure. So I really sort of hammered down on making these, what I called landscape portraits. So, portraits of the landscape, but particularly of specific items, in this case being semi-indigenous plant life to southern Louisiana. Semi-indigenous oxymoron, but plant life that was, very much about involved and deeply invested in the culture of southern Louisiana, but was there as a result of colonialism, migration, again, an allegory for Black people in the South, a space that is very much, both home and antagonist in the sort of conception of life. This is a misbelief tree. These things, if you're ever in New Orleans, like during, I think like April, it's a Japanese loquat, but the Black and Creole population calls it misbelief tree. They have these fruits that are like so delicious, and I would describe it's like a pear with a citrus, it's great. And I always thought it was so funny that it almost like points to the idea of like you're calling it a misbelief tree. It like points to the idea of like skepticism, of like something being too good to be true. So, anyways, again, that's thinking through the plant life subjectivity, and also just the sort of idea of roots, and roots have histories to them. So these plants have moved around, but they're deeply rooted. And it reminded me of Stuart Hall had a quote when Stuart Hall is a British cultural theorist, like kind of the father of like cultural studies. He had a quote when he's talking about the idea and the formation of identity. There's an overemphasis on roots, R-O-T-S, and not enough emphasis on roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. And that identity is formed in that sort of navigation and translation of where people have been. So it's important to uncover history, but know that sort of your making is the paths in which you've traveled. Again, crepe myrtles, another like plant that's ubiquitous. In a lot of cities, but particularly the French Quarter in New Orleans, you see it all around, but not originally indigenous to Louisiana. And then also thinking through like sort of beautification, these plants is coming and making some of the space more beautiful. Magnolias, same thing. Also in a lot of these, there's an emphasis on barriers and borders. Things that sort of like, fences treated in a certain way, peeling back, reminiscing bars and stuff. To just sort of like idea, like this, kind of bring in this idea of feeling like sort of hemmed in, and things like sort of coming crashing around you. It was around this time that I did just was like, all right, I want to get back and figure out how to sort of directly address the figure in this situation. And I thought about the situation of being backlit. So in this, we have this sort of like this joy idea, sort of writ large, or in this like sort of idea of like the blue sky, sunny day, bright light. But light, light casts shadows. Light can necessarily come into things falling out of view, and we've all been in a situation where you take an iPhone photo and person's backlit. And I thought it was a great allegory for Black people as both present in a landscape situation, but also being rejected by it at the same time. As a visual allegory. And this also at the time I was also reading Glissant, reading through Poetics of Relation, and For Opacity sort of came up, and sort of it's somewhat in summary. He states that everyone has a right to opacity in a multicultural, widely diverse world. Everyone has the right to sort of remain not fully knowable. Like not every context is the context to fully understand someone, and that not fully knowing or understanding someone, not making them not having them be transparent. It's not an impetus to hate. You can still love and care about someone you don't and know everything about them. Many times like I think about my partner and just like, oh, I have no idea what you're thinking right now. But it doesn't take away like some the space of empathy. You don't need to know something fully or make it seem to find empathy. So again, continuing with the sort of backlit figures. Also at the same time, I was started making these monochromes, but they appear on the surface to be monochromes, but if you hit it from the right light, it's invisible text, and all the texts were different quotations from music and books and narratives that sort of spoke towards skepticism, towards the sky, like people like witnessing the sky be blue during tragedy, the idea of like the inability to see, and so these paintings again just trying to trouble the space of like light as trouble the space of like light as being this like absolute truth bringer. Light is tricky. Light can play tricks. Light can damage. So all these blue skies that you'll see in the show are painted with the same color, fluorescent blue from Nova Color, tinted with a little bit white. If you're a painter or art conservator, you're not, like, rule number one, you're not supposed to use fluorescent paints. They have a quality called light fastness. It's essentially a paint's ability to hold its color over time. Most every paint, fades to some degree, can fade to some degree. Fluorescent paints fade like that. Like you're talking within like a matter of like 5 or 6 years. It can fade. So yeah. So the sort of invisible text in these is written in an archival UV gloss. The archival UV gloss protects the paint from the sun. So over the course of time, what this sort of skepticism text that's rendered invisible and what just appears to be a blue square becomes burned into the paint by the sunlight. And then sort of like this sort of skepticism becomes readily and heavily apparent in this thing. Again, allegorically, sort of points to the idea: the more days you spend on the more blue sunny days you have on this earth, the more you can kind of recognize there's something behind this. There's something to be skeptical about in this sort of easy read of nature. So it also translates back to the idea that so I mean, I think again, in thinking about the painting as an object and what it's performing as outside of its internal narrative, like what do paintings do? Paintings exist as this sort of parentheses of this cultural space around sort of a falsely permanent object. Like when people talk about being painted, they talk about being immortalized. Like we think you'll have a painting forever. But these and that there's some sort of form of static understanding. But paintings change. Paintings live lives and become different things. I mean, no Jackson Pollock looks like what it looked like coming out of a studio. I mean, most of these things like the chip, paint fades. And that's true of these paintings. And maybe the ideas therein, the idea that roots will change. Relationships will change. These Matt and Abby, they're sweet. They have a baby now. It's just, it's a change. Happy change. Identity will change. People change over time. But also that's the idea that in showing with Audubon, like the idea that the documentation will change. Here you have this person who is like axiomatically committed to like, I'm just presenting a strict, a flat definition of nature, supremely rendered. These are readily reprintable. There's a word that I'm looking for that's escaping me. Reproducible prints. The idea that they will all be the same, and they will maintain this sort of strict definition. But obviously, there's a few doubles in the show, and it just shows between the Havel Audubon prints and the Bean prints, you have changes in it, and they still bear the indelible marks of the artist's life shifting. And there's been much controversy around the Audubon's birds that didn't really exist, or the misnaming of birds, and that these things change over time. So even in this sort of struggle to try and create something that is sort of like objectively just observant, you created something that still has subjective marks. So going back to this idea that I can make a duck painting that's just the most objective thing, like creating something that is totally objective will always be an impossibility. And if you look close enough, you'll see the sort of marks of its history and its subjectivity. So that's my ideas. Yeah, should we, let's do it. All right, thank you.
Thank you. That was great. You answered almost all of my questions, so we're done here for the day.
Oh, no, all right.
I'm joking.
Dinner time.
Yeah, dinner time. Yeah, let's start kind of what brings you the most happiness outside of your studio? You touched on happiness and happiness of painting and things like that, but what is it that, it's not just a sunny day that you're feeling foolishly happy, but what brings you happiness when you're not in your studio and you're not painting?
Music, absolutely, I think is, sort of this joy project, there's other works that I haven't mentioned where, I'm trying to think about, painting as a space of dance and whatnot. I wish it's sometimes like I wish, that it was easy to sort of have the evocative nature of music, like the evocative power of music present in painting. And that's certainly like a struggle and a thing that I want to continue with. And
In your mind, have you ever successfully depicted music visually?
no, it's something that's still, it's an ongoing struggle.
A regular experiment? Do you actively experiment with?
Well, so
creating the art?
I have a series of paintings that, it's not the depiction of music, but I've been making, I had a show back in 2022 making these dance floor paintings where I was essentially making these large panel constructions with collage material. And then in order to actually do the painting process, I'm blasting music, stepping in buckets of paint, and sort of moving through the space of this collage, the sort of material of this collage, to create the painting aspect. So, as an indelible trace of someone enjoying music, but that's still a translation, right? So I still haven't gotten there. But it's a fun problem to have, right?
So we're talking about the passage of time. Obviously, these prints were printed from the same plate, 27 years apart from each other. They occupied the same space. They occupied a printing press. They had a different printer, so there's different hand involved. What's your sense on the crossing of paths within time, where there's the same experience that's had in the same place, but at a different time?
Part of me wants to be like, those are utterly different experiences, right? But at the same time, I think it goes back to that issue of like, doing heavy manual labor on like the sugarcane plantations, that you want it's both completely different situations, but it's also both. You still feel charged with like the history, like these things being having done, these things have happening before, and really it becomes, like I said, it's like it becomes that you lose perspective of the distance of those things. So it's like, I don't want to get mystical about it or anything, but there is something. There's spirits and stuff in like in like shared spaces, and it's different, but you still can't logically it's different, but there's still a part of you that's like there's something here.
In thinking about like literal and metaphorical distance, are your current route routes informing where your roots are headed? Your lineal roots, like you said that you're from Memphis.
Yes.
But New Orleans is your home.
Yeah.
You're in New York now. You were in Connecticut. You're in Virginia. You're kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
Are your routes that you're taking now
headed
informing where your roots will be?
They must be, right? Because they have to be. And, I do feel like New Orleans is my chosen home. But every time I go back, it's like I know I'm a profoundly different person than the person I was here before. And that informed by all right, you went to Yale and then you went to New York and like now you're back here and like you're different. People treat you different. Like the relationships become different. So I don't think you're not asking me to predict where it's all leading, but I can't separate the routes changing. It was in a residency. Well, all right, I'll leave this person's name out of it, but I was in a residency with an artist, and he talked about growing up in the same neighborhood all of his life, well into his mid-20s, and he ended up getting into art school and was able to do art and whatnot. And he came back, and then someone from the neighborhood was like, "Oh, what's up? Like, it's like, who are you?" It's like, I'm this name that I've lived I'm from here. And the guy was like, "No, you're not from here." And he's like, "Yeah, I am. We grew up together." "No, you're not from here." And it's the simple act of leaving meant that you were no longer able to come back to this place. the root had changed you profoundly. And there's truth in that. There's also deep sadness in that.
Wow, that's profound in that, like, there's the connotation that being hyper local is sometimes a negative thing,
Yeah.
and then being hyper local is a positive thing.
Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of like, coming back to the hometown, coming back to the block, it's like, it's impossible. It's a great myth. It's a great fantasy that we can come back and be never changed, but you're changed.
A journey. I want to go back. There's a couple of topics actually. So you and I were talking a while ago, and I made a note of this in my phone, and I had to dig it out. I was going through my notes while you were talking, and I found it. And you said, "As much as the light tells, the light hides."
Yeah.
Can you talk about kind of like that idea of in your obsessions and notions of like that balance between like the shadow and the shade?
Yeah.
And like, where do you find comfort in those two places? Like, do you enjoy kind of being shadow? Do you enjoy kind of being at the back, or do you want to be in a light but hidden by light? That there's something that you're able to hide by being in the light and being at the forefront.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I was muted, I think there's power in being in the shadows, right? But actually being able to hide yourself in the light, that's nice. I'm interested in that. I don't have a fully thought idea of that. I actually think there's partially like there's a good truth in that. Like it's like, yeah, I would like to be no one like, being totally invisible is not, while there may be power in it, it's not also a totally enviable position. Hiding in the light is, that's
to say something along the lines of like, you can allow people to see what you want them to see.
Yeah.
So what's illuminated is what you're allowing, and then
it was funny. I was thinking when you said hiding in the light, I was like thinking of something like Snoop Dogg. He's everywhere. He's ubiquitous. But who is Snoop Dogg really, right? Like, he's like, and he lives it like he doesn't live under strict media scrutiny because he's ever present. Like that's a nice way to live. So yeah, I think that would be a great position. Like you sort of maintain power, but you don't maintain scrutiny. With specifically like thinking about, as much as light shows it hides, I do literally think of the aspect of the spotlight. Like when focus is on something else, there's something else falling out of focus. There's something else that's being ignored. And to some extent, I think there is power in being ignored because it can lead to like harder work or a deeper. Everyone knows what's happening in the spotlight. Like they are very well aware of the spotlight. The spotlight has no awareness of what's going on outside of them or what's happening at the margins. So, my inclination is like it's tougher. But there's benefits. Like I would prefer to be at the margins, looking and understanding everything that's happening around me, as opposed to being in the center and oblivious.
Speaking of margins and speaking about what is happening elsewhere, we were having a conversation earlier, and it was something that you wanted to touch on again about like wage inequity and wage equality and presenting work that discusses this in areas that may or may not necessarily ever have to worry about financial stability or financial well-being or financial status whatsoever. I mean,
I was giving this lecture to a student who's seen it already, and then I was hit with a question that was like very frank and very sort of to the point, and it caught me off guard, and that I didn't consider it. It's like, they were like, we really appreciate you coming and talking about sort of these issues of race and class and wealth inequality and the sort of subjectivity of Black people. How do you feel, being in a room, and that room at that time happened to be all white, and she was like, how do you feel presenting that in a room that's that is all white, and possibly a lot of students who come from privileged backgrounds. And I think the immediate thought, I gave some answer, but it was thinking about, like, no, like the issues of class and issues of race are not just the issues of those who are victims to the situation. It's sort of everyone's issue. We are sort of all intrinsically tied together. I think I'd mentioned Baldwin's "Stranger in the Village" essay, but I didn't illuminate that. Towards the end of that essay, he talks about America is a diverse place. Sweden is not. They can pretend it doesn't exist. Or the issues of the issues of race don't exist. I think that also holds on to the issues of class don't exist to some degree in those marginalized countries. But America can't continue to pretend that those things don't exist. So we all sort of have to be sort of constantly engaging, and all voices be engaging with the sort of the subject matter, and that presenting this work is not like throwing it at you. It's like, yo, we're all here, yo. We all occupy a space in the South. Like we all, you can't avoid living a life that has some that is dealing with class. So we have to all be aware of it, which also speaks back to the whole thing. It's like if you're in the center, the people at the margin see you, but you don't always see them, and that is a weakness. Like you don't want to be in that space of not thinking about the other because they think about you. I mean,
right.
they know you.
That's right. Well, speaking of people who know you and who you know, and you take great pride in the subjects of your paintings, you take great care of the subjects in your paintings. These are your people, they're your friends, they're your family. And the notion of paying them per sale of painting and resale.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen that unfold on the resale side of things, on the secondary? Have you been able to negotiate
Nothing's
this?
ever resold at this point. Okay. So I did that show. That show was in October. It would be terrible if something resold already. Like, oh my God, not vetting people. And in the earlier show, I really tried to keep it to institutions. So it was a situation where these things aren't necessarily going to be resold. And I didn't stipulate anything in resales in the earlier show from New Orleans. I'm interested to see what'll happen. The title of the show, Footsteps is the Dark, is some sort of tacit acknowledgement that like we're stepping out of the ship. Like we're walking and we don't know, we're just putting our feet in front of us. I don't know what's going to happen. But that sort of fear of the unknown shouldn't keep me from making that step and taking that quote unquote risk, which I don't think is a real risk at all. Anyways, I won't go into that. But so I forgot the question.
Well, I just thought of another question to follow that up. I mean, in your personal, like, say, estate planning, the Kevin Brisco estate in 130 years from now, will you stipulate that the subjects that you painted throughout your life, that their families then kind of, how can you?
Well, the way in which it. The other thing is, the hope is that I, the artist, have and pledge and in the contract act as steward of the situation. So none of the money goes to me, but it goes to this. Okay, well, the sale of the artist fee goes to me, but the sort of residuals and the resales don't go to me. But I pledge that I'll be the steward of this happening. I gotta make a lot of paintings, make a lot of money, so I can hire some people.
That's a lot of tracking.
Yeah,
you got spreadsheets for days.
It is. I mean, I even just within I've only got maybe 10 or so paintings that are out there and getting all the information, spreading it. I was like, oh man, how did I go from painting to just straight admin? So yeah, it is it's something. I don't know. My estate will have to figure it out, and they'll figure it out. But yeah, the hope is that an apparatus forms around it that if these things actually do become generational wealth objects, these people have financial planners who can stay on top of that stuff, or people counting their money, who can stay on top of these sort of resales of these things. But at the other time, it's also there's a lot of trust placed in the hands of the collectors. I think when I made my first show, where it was can't buy these paintings, I still had a sort of mythologized idea of the collector as just greedy, I gotta get all these paintings for my money. And then over the course of being an artist, you meet people who are deeply engaged and deeply like care about the work and who are excited to like go into like be like, you know, be a part of sort of like the internal and value legacy of a work. So, you know, at the same time, you know, with regards to like selling these works, at least on the front end, it also like a lot of the nefariousness in the art market can really just come in like much later down the line. At least on the front end, I feel like the works are with collectors I trust to keep to be excited about keeping up and abreast about how these things are being traded and moved and how the money's going.
That's the place to be.
Yeah,
That's the place to be. It's all, you're building a chosen family, right?
yeah,
Like all of your subjects, all of your collectors, all the people you're working with are all chosen families.
yeah, yeah.
It's a community.
It is a
Your
community.
definition of community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it.
I do, you know, there, and I feel moved to say that, you know, this is how I've chosen to sort of deal with the portrait and subjectivity and equity. It's not a standard for all artists. Like it's not, you know, art does not need to be beholden to being the rightest person in the room. You know, it's an expression of life, and life also has some effed up. I shouldn't curse. No.
I can't tell you what to do.
I know, but my mom's gonna watch this. Effed up, mom. Things happen in the world, and like art should be able to sort of have the license to express those things, or to at least like be able to contend with those things. So, you know, in this model that I've built, it's not like a charge like everyone should be doing this. Like it's just how I wanted to express those things, and there's limitations in that. You know, I've had decent critiques where it's like, you know, your paintings are honorific in a way, and there is a limitation in that. And I was like, oh, there's other artists who aren't honorific, so let them take care of that, and I'll do me.
Keep doing you. Yeah. I'm going to open it up to the general public, to any questions. I've asked everything I've had in mind and top of mind. So
Raise your hand and I have a microphone. I will pass it around.
Guess we covered it.
Yeah, I covered it.
Everything.
We can wait.
No, yeah,
Wait.
we,
Take a minute, take a minute.
We will wait here
We
all
will
night
wait.
long until you decide on a question.
So I was wondering, what was your process in terms of like trying to figure out how to put your ideas into like a visual, like translate that visual like language from like ideas?
So like what the process is like, there's a thought, and then how does it find like a visual representation for that concept, or
Like the idea of like light, caricaturism to, I don't know, like your compositions of like light.
yeah. You know, so I think like some things, I mean, things like the sort of impetus for either a visual allegory, which is something I think I've avoided in a lot of parts of my practice. It can come from a lot of different places. Like sometimes it is the experience of witnessing something and being like, oh, that's pretty like, I don't know, beautiful. Like right now I'm making these paintings of 4 o'clock flowers because I think combination looking at Alex Katz's, you know, floral paintings, and also you know, Warhol's like floral prints, and then really looking at 4 o'clocks, and it's like, man, these things were made to be visually stunning, and that you have this bright fuchsia on top of this like, you know, cool green, and it really looks like an optical illusion of these things like completely floating, like separate from these things. So sometimes like a visual thing is just visual, like straight up visual inspiration. I think like these things look cool. Is this going along the lines of what you were asking? Because also at the same time, there's also work to be done of like, you know, I'm thinking of an idea, but I need sort of idea, like I'm thinking of a conceptually of an idea of like what subjects I want to paint, but as far as like how would I visually organize that, like there's planning that has to happen. Like looking at other paintings, looking at movies is a huge thing. The compositions of different directors, like Fassbender, like Rainer Werner Fassbender's compositions in his film are nuts. This guy did a lot of drugs. but in really mundane ways. Like it's not even like fantastical. It's like the way he's chosen to shoot an apartment and dissect the frame is like beautiful. And it's like, okay, all right, we're pulling this like and trying to pull it into a work. Yeah, and then yeah, sometimes things arise from, you don't know where, whatever that muse is. But it takes me so long to make paintings that I'm thinking of more ideas than I'm making at the same time. So there's so many things that I like just haven't even gotten to and want to like get to. So yeah.
Hi. So I was noticing when you were showing your paintings that a lot of your, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of your paintings seem to be focused on, exploring a meaning and finding a meaning in your work. And I was wondering if that's something that you personally strive for. Or you think that all work inherently has that meaning, or if everyone should strive for that meaning?
Okay, good question. I think I was also asked by a student, like, do you have any biases, and like, do you know what your biases is? Are you an objective observer of art? So when you ask the question, should everyone strive for meaning? My answer is no. But when it comes to my own personal bias, if I really did have something that grinded my gears in art, is completely apathetic work. Like work that either like refuses to take a stand, refuses to like accept what its subject matter is, like work that's constantly hiding itself in this sort of cool, removed idea. I know there's validity in that. Like art does not have to be a speech. Like it has an ability to be nonsense, and that is one of its powers. But me personally, I can't stand an apathetic again, I'm not apathetic piece of art.
I couldn't agree more. It's like lazy.
Right,
It's
like
lazy art.
You're just getting away with something,
Yeah.
like, and you're like afraid. Believe in yourself.
I love it. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to our conversation.
You not gonna ask me what I'm reading?
All right? What book are you? I was just going to. What book are you reading, and what movie are you watching?
Well, I was like trying to think, like, should I say this? Because like it had the connotations of it. But no, I'm reading this guy, Dr. Carl Hart, Drug Use for Adults, and it was a book that my friend handed to me, and I can be kind of like, I don't need to read that. Like the guy, like, and I'm reading through this book, and the guy has like a pretty both convincing arguments, and then also like, bro, you are on one right now. But it has like to change, but like in his advocacy for the legalization of opioids, which come on, our world's in crisis right now, right? So you're not gonna. But he did make the point that James Baldwin in 1986 said straight up, like, what do I think about the dope bill? Like, dope should be legal, because you've only sort of established a system where you can penalize the poor people for doing it. So that's what I'm reading.
What movie are you? What you mentioned film a lot. So what's the most recent film that you're a fan of?
Yeah, I'm going to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. I'm outing myself. I'm a Marvel completionist.
How is that from a compositional standpoint?
From a
right?
compositional standpoint, yeah. No, but I saw the old like 1930s Scarface movie, the like OG, like the crime movie that started all. Wild compositions in that movie. That like it's and like you could like really see like, oh, these guys, like these people were still thinking theater production as they were coming to cameras in really cool ways. So yeah, that was the most recent movie that really like got me. Also, I watched Hoop Dreams for the first time. Yeah, I'd never seen Hoop Dreams, and I was looking at best movies from the '90s, and I watched it. I was like, oh, it's like I did not expect to find this as like powerful as it was.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Aaron.